Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 27th edition of the Agile Austin Product and AI SIG. Please allow me to share my screen. We have the first of the the completion of the first of our two-part series with Dorian today. It's really exciting. If you were here in February, you would have seen part one of customer collaboration, Agile Lip Service, or Essential Enabler. And so if you're watching on the recording, please feel free to watch that one first. We'll get back to Dorian and this exciting content in a moment. Just going to talk a little bit about Agile Austin. Here is our mission. We are a 501c6 nonprofit organization. Been around for a real long time, more than 20 years, actually almost 20 years at this point. Here's our board of directors. Pro tip, there's an election coming up, I think in August. And so you're going to start seeing messages about that if you want to run for the board. I believe a few seats will be open this year. A little bit about sponsorship and membership. Feel free to inquire about both or either. Many benefits of both of them. There are about 6 regular SIGs that meet. We do have the Keep Austin Agile Conference coming up real soon too, and I can't remember what the day is. Usually we have that in here. But these are the 6 regularly meeting special interest groups. You are at the one at the lower left, Product and AI SIG, but there are many more. We do have a couple of sponsors to shout out, Agile Velocity and ResumeX as our platinum and gold sponsor, and our silver sponsor, Ad Malaria Coaching. For members, we do have benefit of a professional development. Please feel free to apply, and you can reach out to me or Vishal if you want more information on that. And our platinum sponsor, Agile Velocity, is offering a discount of 15% off workshops. Take advantage of that if you'd like. And we are all volunteers here. So if you are interested in volunteering, reach out to Vishal, me, or contact@agileaustin.org. Speaking of Vishal and I, just a little bit about us. We both joined Agile Austin. Next year, it will be 20 years, 2 decades ago. Pretty crazy. And you can see what we're all about here right now, kind of the intersection of product, Agile, AI, everything in between. And Dorian is a great example of the kind of content that we put forward. I'm excited to talk to him. Here, a second part soon. We've got some upcoming events and some openings. And so we've got Jason Tanner, who wrote a book about software profitability streams with Luke Homan, who did the innovation games, came out with a book about that really cool form factor too of a book, but he's going to be talking about building sustainably profitable products. A little bit more on the product side than the AI side, but that is good. We are the product and AI SIG. If you are interested or have a topic you'd like to suggest for May or June, please let me know. With that, we're going to talk about the part 2 of this presentation, and I'll hand it over to here's a little bit more. There was the boilerplate, or not the boilerplate, but the overview. And here's just a little bit about what we'll be talking about today. And I will introduce my co-lead, Vishal, to give us an introduction to Dorian.
Hey, folks. Thank you all for joining. Once again, we have this one's our first of the, as you know, I guess as a SIG, the first time we did a 2-part series. Dorian is also my partner in crime when it comes to some work that we do outside, in terms of consulting and stuff. I'm very pleased to introduce him once more. He is the founder of the MAD framework, Modified Agile for Hardware Development, built ground up for Agile in the hardware space. His background actually was very much so in product development, and which is why a lot of his experience around VOCs comes from. And he's going to talk to us about the second part. And today is actually where we dive into the meat. So without further ado, I would like to hand this over to Dorian.
Thank you, Vishal. I am trying to share my screen.
You should be able to now.
Oh, here we go. I think I can do it now. Thank you.
The problem is like
Oop, I'm gonna mute
Let me
Rob's.
know when you can
Yeah,
see.
looking good.
All right. All right. Thanks again, Vishal. I was, this is a big topic for me. I shared my background a little bit last time. I used to be an electrical engineer by early training, worked for IBM, as we were talking about before the show. That was my first step into the development world. Um, and then moved into management consulting and a wide range of things. And what I've found, and on the journey, I got an MBA, and an MBA gave me some market research skills. And when you minor in research in an MBA, it's basically three classes: statistics, quantitative, and qualitative feedback. And I didn't have a massive depth, but I had enough where I had more than anybody else on the team, and often in the company in some cases. So I was always the one who was being relied on for, okay, how do we do this market research stuff? So that led me down the path of VOC and how to do it effectively, because the last thing we wanted to do is be our day job. VOC is something that we need to have clean, seamless, efficient, suit our needs, not just be a side activity that people find painful. So last time we talked about setting up a customer panel. So we're going to summarize a little bit what we did last time, just for folks that weren't with us. And we do want to dive into some of the specific tactics, because at the end of the day, it's the tactics that are going to be, take the time. You have to execute them. Somebody's got to learn them. And I'll share with you some, key tips along the way to hopefully make this work. Now, a lot of my emphasis is hardware, physical solutions, but you can't do hardware today without software. So we're always blending and creating hybrid systems. So we have to involve software. And so hopefully the techniques we're going to talk about today are relevant for hardware and software. And we'll hopefully make this interactive. So you can, I would love to get your thoughts on how you approach customer feedback. So we talked about channels last time. We're going to talk a little bit about VOC, what that means, and then how do you do that consistently and for what purpose, and then we'll talk about some specific techniques. So just to kind of refresh, what are we seeking? We're obviously looking for an understanding of customer needs, their problems, underlying reasons for what they're doing, making decisions, why they react to your solutions in certain ways. And we're using it to hopefully guide our decisions. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about, is how do we leverage customer feedback to make better, faster, more efficient decisions that stick. But one thing to note, and one of the first things we'll talk about, is why teams don't do customer feedback, why they find it so painful, because we can't leverage, it's not the only thing. We need to make sure that we've got a vision, that we've got clear strategy, that there's good market analysis. So customer input is just one major piece of data. I think a lot of teams fear it because it's gonna kind of jack them around, for lack of better reasons. And we'll look at the reasons why teams kind of fear it a little bit. So it's just a component. It's not the answer. And this is, Vishal mentioned, we focus a lot on the MAD framework. This is kind of the visual of the MAD framework, where we start out with strategic intent. We have what we call an on-ramp, and then ongoing iterative learning and execution cycles. And the challenge is, in traditional product development, we might do, if you're even a solid company, you do a lot of research right up front. You think you got a good answer to establish requirements, and then you kind of leverage that data, if you're even the best, to make good decisions and use that throughout your project. What we've early discovered is that, well, that data is often flawed. It's time-based. Customers need to see it, feel it, touch it, experience solutions before they can really give you great feedback. So we need more of a steady flow of feedback throughout the project, and that's going to give us much better results. So we're going to need to understand big questions before the project even starts, maybe building a business case. We need to understand how to remove major risk early on. We need feedback in the middle on specific features. Did we do good enough? We'll talk about a little bit. And then, of course, later, we want to validate our solution. Did we get it right? Does it have the quality? Does it have the experience that we're looking for? And the earlier we can get those questions answered, obviously the lower the risk and the better we can adapt to it. So the first step in any successful customer feedback or VOC is determining why we need it. And then we can focus on who, when, how, what to get it. So we'll focus more on the who, when, why, how today. Actually, the why, hopefully we addressed last time. And one of the things, thinking about your process a little bit, it's when do you think about even having a feedback plan? We like to think about it as early as in the on-ramp, when you're just initiating that project. How important is customer feedback going to be to the success of this project? And then think about what that looks like as the project evolves. So if you don't do that, typically they're going to not do it, or it's going to be mispurposed, or it's just going to be the wrong timing, all kinds of factors. So for software, it's more of an ongoing something you have to think about. For hardware, we kind of need discrete points that's going to be important to get that customer feedback, and we need to think about that from the very beginning. All right, so I mentioned the bottom line. What we're going to be looking at is how do you make optimal decisions? From our experience, that's what makes or breaks a product. It can make or break market success. It makes or breaks margin, customer satisfaction. All kinds of factors come down to every single decision. So we're looking for speed, efficiencies, sticky, and data-driven. And our voice of the customer is going to give us that data. So one of the first steps to making this work is hopefully in your process, and this is kind of centered to the MAD framework, is how does the team make decisions? What's the framework the team is using to make decisions, communicate them, involve all the stakeholders? And it often comes down to these kind of four factors. We know who's going to make the decision, what's the roles, and a big thing that's often missing is the criteria. Is what's the criteria for a decision? And this is where a lot of the voice of the customer comes in. Because ideally, you got criteria such as constraints, cost, schedule, strategy, but you also want that customer feedback. What's the reaction to customers based on the major priorities that we're trying to satisfy in the marketplace? So setting that criteria right up front is going to give you guidance for what you're looking for when you start collecting customer data. So in this simple example, we've got a forklift. The team had to decide, should we use hardened steel or some sort of titanium alloy? They had different options to create the lift. And they had to go back and say, okay, how are we going to make this decision? And so once they established the framework very early on as part of the process, then they can apply that every time. How does this affect the customer decision factors? We'll use an understanding of the priorities of customers as a major component to driving these decisions, in addition to things like cost, impact on schedule, and other factors for the project. So, but part of that criteria has to be customer input. And the question is, how do we get that data? How do we get a steady flow of that is usable for our project? So just to open this up, I'm hoping it's going to be a little interactive here, not just me as a talking head, but we all know the Agile Manifesto. Number 3 is customer collaboration over contract negotiation, which implies you actually are working with customers on a regular basis. You've got that feedback loop. We know it's a top principle. From my experience, teams don't really do it very consistently. They don't do it very effectively. From your experience, do you see something similar, and why might that be? Why do teams not make it more a priority and struggle to really do it? Any thoughts from folks today? Open up your mic. I don't have my chat open, but welcome to use that. There we go. We've got chat open. So why do teams struggle with this? Yeah.
I'll throw some ideas out there since I'm the one that usually talks. I think we might have talked about this last time too, but the customer, there's sort of the differentiation between the buyer and the user, and that can be kind of an interesting thing. You can kind of like roll it up into like where you have channel partners, distributors, things like that, and so the end customer might be hard to get to. I think that the main, when I've seen through my career, I'm not, I generally am not product management. I'm in engineering. It's 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 easier to not talk to them. Like you have to get outside of the four walls, and you have to have a company that's set up correctly where you don't have it's not a sales pitch, right? To sort of say, and I've seen where you've had sales folks that sort of shield the customer because it's their kind of customer relationship and product could cause it to go sideways. And I've seen it sort of the opposite too. So I've seen some of these, are just a couple of patterns that I've seen that can make it kind of challenging to talk to the customer, depending on how you define that word.
Yeah, you hit a lot of great points. I love your comment. It's easier not to talk to them. And I think that's a really good summary.
Just build it. You're already late. It's going to be done. It should be done. It should have been
Right,
done
right.
already.
Well, we already made that decision. Why are we revisiting it? All kinds of things come out of that. Yeah. Anybody else? Has anybody tried to do it and got a lot of pushback or um, had to stop or failed for some reason? All right, let's keep going a little bit. I'll share some of the reasons I see. So, I mean, I think that was a good summary, Matt, is that, it takes time, energy, resources. And I think one of the things is it takes skills. And most people aren't trained in it. And so you're often fear of getting it wrong. And that is actually a real fear, which means you're not getting the right data. The results can be and will be distracting, difficult to process. They're going to be fuzzy. They can be misleading. And it's often not taken seriously for all those same factors because you have so many other priorities. How do you make and should you make customer feedback a priority? And this often comes down to really nobody owns it. So you got a lot of factors that limit your ability to do it. Just to kind of give you, and we'll share this presentation with you, but it's a good question. Who is the customer? If we ask you to go to customer feedback, the first question would be, who are we supposed to be listening to? And that's one of the nice things about it. Doing it is it forces you to address the question, who is our customer? Who's driving success in this market? Who do we need to get feedback from? So one of the nice benefits of even putting any voice of the customer in place is it drives a common understanding of who the customer is when we think about channels, decision makers, users, installers, all kinds of customers we have to think about. Sales won't give us access. Customers don't want to talk to us. All kinds of excuses for people not doing it. But I promise you, if you focus on it and you build it in as part of your process, part of your culture, all of these are very surmountable. So if you want to dive in and you want feedback after today and you have a specific challenge, please reach out to Vishal and I, and we'll give you some tips. So salespeople can be amenable to it. It's just how you approach it. Understanding who the customer is, easy to do. It just takes a little thought sometimes. And how do you approach it? So we'll work through that a little bit, but they are insurmountable. What I'm going to share with you is some of the tools that we use in the MAD framework as part of our learning portal and giving people guidance on how to do voice of the customer. This is kind of an excerpt to give you some ideas. And what we're going to focus on when we think about making decisions on every attribute of a solution. In our world, it might be material, I mentioned. It might be, is the chassis curve, the curvature good enough? Is the look of it good enough? Is the UI good enough? Is the button touch good enough? Is the packaging? All kinds of good enough questions. And our voice of the customer work or feedback mechanisms should guide us on every step of the way, particularly on the major, most impactful decisions that we're going to make to identify and to capture market success. So what we're talking today is about customer data. We know that we're going to marry this with technical data, with the constraints. Most people are good at the technical testing, how to get that data. They're really horrible about getting that customer data. So there's a couple key techniques in my general, as I share tips. First tip is somebody's got to own this for your team, for your group. So hopefully you're designating somebody who's kind of your guru in feedback, and they might have another hat. That's okay. But there's somebody who's kind of passionate about it. They have understood some of the techniques. They can kind of guide you on which technique might be best for which problem. And I'll share with you some techniques today to give you a starting point, but somebody's got to own it because this is a huge topic. You could get a PhD in it and you're never going to be an expert in it overnight. You want to identify key techniques that work for you, for your environment, for the questions that you have, and how to get that accurate enough to get good enough data. The couple of tools we talked about last time are customer panels. That's by far a recommended number one thing is identify a range of customers that will give you consistent feedback. It's almost cooperative development. And you're going to leverage that to go out when you need it on demand sometimes, and give you that fast access and good enough feedback. So there's no perfect in-market research. It's very asymptotic. There's a lot of data that says if I go out to even 10 customers in a homogeneous market, that's going to be good enough to get really good decisions. So we're not going to focus on that too much today. We want to focus a little bit more on the tactics. You can use focus groups. One of the big difference when a customer panel and a focus group, customer panels know you. They're involved with you. They've made a decision that I want to help you be successful. Focus groups are often, they're anonymous. And so they have different purposes, but you can use some of the same techniques. But we're going to focus more on customer panels and how to leverage customers that already know you. Oh, and I'm having a problem going forward. There we go. Okay, so just to answer the question, who should own this? Well, we define roles such as product manager, product owner in MAD framework. And in software, we got product owner, we got product managers defined slightly different in different processes. Every company defines them a little different. But the message is somebody has to own it. Now, it doesn't have to be one of these two roles, but they should really be one of the drivers of the need for it, what you're looking for, and why it's important at certain points in the project to get it. Then you can leverage somebody else, maybe who is more focused on the day-to-day tactics. Hopefully it's somebody on the team, but it could be a resource. You might have a market research resource. But if you have that, you want to bring them into your team so that they understand what you're trying to accomplish. And it's not just some ad hoc project to say, hey, go figure out if they like this product. They need to be kind of embedded and understand what you're trying to accomplish as we talked about the project evolution. But bottom line, somebody has to own it. So let's dive a little bit. What are we seeking? And this is a little bit, if you're going to go get customer feedback, the first question is, well, how are you going to use it? So yeah, you're going to make decisions, but how are we going to communicate what they said? Because the nature of customer feedback is it's fuzzy, and you've got to structure it and have an idea of how you're going to structure it even before you go out and seek it. So it's going to guide everything about what you do is first understanding the questions you want to answer, and then how you're going to capture and how you're going to process the data even before you go get it. So I'll share with you a couple of tips on how to communicate it and what you're looking for, and kind of fill in the blanks in a sense where you've got gaps in knowledge. How do you identify those gaps, and how do you fill them in with customer feedback? So from the beginning, hopefully you created some strategic questions. That should be a key part of your project is what do we need to know at what points? In this simple example, this is a high-tech movie camera that does pan and tilt. They kicked it off with what we call strategic intent. What do we, when we're done with this project, what does success look like? We know that customers care about these four things. And the number one thing they care about is platform maneuverability. That's what we've learned early customer feedback. And we want to continue to refine and understand that through the project because we identified it as a top factor customers care about. So as the project evolves, we're always going to go back and say, is this good enough? And how do we focus our customer feedback is going to be on those top priority items because that's where you're going to get the best bang for the buck. So they would leverage their channel, their customer feedback loop, their customer panel to get feedback. If we do this for tilt speed and acceleration, these different factors, and they kind of see it over time, we won't talk about things like rapid prototyping, but I'll share with you a couple of techniques on how to get some things in front of customers quickly, is we want to get feedback to say, when we get down to that specification, that we want to achieve a maximum angular speed of 45 degrees per second, et cetera. Is this good enough for those customers? Is this going to hit the decision factor that's going to allow them or encourage them to choose us versus our competitor? Did we get these priorities right? And that's what we're looking for as we get feedback ongoing. Those are kinds of things where a customer often has to see it, feel it, see in action sometimes to say, yeah, you nailed it. That's good enough. Or what if have you considered this and this, and this? And then how do you aggregate that to make a good decision as a team and as an organization? But it starts with the framework so that you know what you're looking for. And then we're going to look at the techniques on how to get these answers a little bit. So one technique that a lot of software teams use, and we often recommend it for hardware teams as well, is the customer persona. And where most teams kind of fall down, I would say, or misuse them, is the customer personas kind of come out as a brainstorming session. We've got these 4 types of customers. They treat them equally. They kind of guess what's important to them. There's really not a lot of data behind it. So if you're using customer personas, the general advice is make them useful as in terms of actually driving decisions. And then they're almost a hypothesis when you initiate a project, and then you're going to start refining it, completing it, or leveraging it, and maybe it's going to adapt a little bit as you leverage your customer feedback channels. So make sure that tools like this, they actually guide decisions. They're going to allow you to do the trade-offs more effectively. They're going to allow you to focus and answer those good enough. So if you're developing customer personas, a recommendation is you build that customer needs pyramid right into the persona. So we're clarifying who the customer is. We're clarifying what's important to them in the right priorities. It's not, a bunch of bullets that don't have meaning. It's the priorities of the customer and what's going to drive their decision and satisfaction in the market. And this gives us a framework for both validating it as we get our customer feedback loop going, and leveraging it for making decisions. So we want to know, in this case, we use a hypothesis, or have we validated over time through the project? We're going to be validating it, and you're going to be leveraging your customer feedback loops to do that. So we want some framework to be able to capture that data. The general concept is, in this case, is a customer needs pyramid. So where we have essential needs, important needs, bonus needs. This is just a framework for how to think about what's most important to the customer and how we prioritize it. So how we're going to use this is that when we start doing VOC work, it gives us a framework to start populating what we've heard, what we've learned. I'll share with you a little bit more how to do that. From there, at the big picture, we want to keep going down into detail. So whatever you need feedback on, if it's writing user stories, prioritizing user stories, understanding customer outcomes, those are all things that we're going to validate and leverage our customer feedback loops to do. Okay. So just kind of summary, a little bit of last time and the purpose. So the bottom line here is we need to do it with intention and purpose. And that's one of the reasons that it often falls to the side, is that we do it, but it's often a side activity and it's not always driving day-to-day decisions. If it's not really being used to drive real decisions, then it's not going to get the power and the importance that it really needs to. All right, how do we do it? We could spend a lot of time on techniques, but we're going to just share a couple of them. The techniques do matter. How you approach getting customer research does matter. There's a wide range of techniques out there. This is just kind of a high level. Some are going to be very dangerous. Matt mentioned getting sales feedback only is very dangerous. We'll talk a little bit about why. We recommend generally customer panels, and then leveraging probing interviews and some group activity, group techniques, which we'll share next with you. So real quick quote, who said this? If I ask customers what they want, they would tell me faster horses. Anybody in chat? We're gonna spout it out. Who said that quote? And it's one of the reasons people say, we don't need to do market research. Steve Jobs is famous for saying, we don't do market research, or like people quote him on that. Even though they do a lot of market research, they just don't do things like surveys. They don't do a lot of focus groups. They do more meaningful, in-depth market research like observation, probing interviews. So, and they invest a lot into it. Okay. So just to answer the question is at
so
Henry
if you're not
Ford.
looking at chat, yeah, Peter did mention it's Ford, and it's like Matt's mentioning Jeff Bezos.
Okay.
Jeff
might have said it too, but yeah, that was Henry Ford. He's famous for asking that. And really what it is, especially back Henry Ford at the era, he didn't understand market research really, different techniques for different purposes. If you ask customers about their experience of transporting their family or getting supplies, they would learn all about the limitations of horses and how they could improve on other solutions that weren't horses. But of course, one of the key factors in market research, or good voice of the customer, we'll share in a minute, is how to approach it and how not to approach it. And he didn't really know how to approach it. So, okay, we do want to rely on sales, and we can use some of the same techniques. So this is where when you build your VOC toolbox, you can actually leverage, whether it's a customer panel or a sales panel, you can kind of view your sales team as a customer panel, which is great. What you don't want to do is leverage them and say, hey, what's the answer? Because you're going to get it secondhand. They're not trained in getting understanding of needs or good understanding of priorities from customers. It's going to be inconsistent. You're going to get a lot of recency, confirmation bias. There's a lot of reasons that direct input from sales is not going to be very accurate. So we need channel to sales, but we also need a channel directly with our end customers. All right, so we're assuming that you have some sort of access to customers. If you don't, that's a broader question. Again, reach out to us. How do you do that? But you want to identify, there's no right or wrong answer. So it depends on how homogeneous your market is, how many different types of categories or segments there are, how broad it is. If you have a customer intimacy strategy, 2 or 3 key customers, that makes it a lot easier. If it's a heterogeneous market, you're going to have to cluster. You're going to have to think about it. It's where those personas can really help. And we want to identify at minimum 8 to 10 customers that we can consistently rely on to get us good feedback. And it's going to change. You might discover in 6 months or a year that half of them are horrible at giving you feedback, or they're just completely wrong for what we're trying to accomplish. Swap them out, find another 5. So finding those customers is a challenge. Motivating them is a challenge. Keeping them fresh is a challenge, but those are all the details. Every time I've set up a customer panel for a company, I've found it used again and again. And often you think it's going to be for one purpose, and you got a lot of other groups going, hey, you're having a customer discussion coming up, or you have opportunity to get in front of a customer. How can we use that? We've got a couple key questions. You'll find it's a valuable resource for the team. So that's where I'll leave it now. We're going to assume that you've got some ability to access that. Okay. Now you do have to often work with sales, and then you have to make it so that it's not threatening to them and it's valuable to sales. Those are other techniques. We talked a little bit about when you do it, but when to set up a customer channel is really thinking about it ongoing. But for hardware, at least it's during the on-ramp, you have to think about, do we have the right access to customers for this project? If we don't, one of the early actions is let's identify the right customers and figure out how we're going to communicate and how we're going to motivate them to talk with us, for us to listen to. So a lot of ways, Agile should be a cooperative development process. And right from the beginning is, what does that look like for you? So now let's dive into some of the techniques. I'm not watching time too closely, I know. So we don't have a lot of time, a huge topic, but let's dive into some of the techniques. When most people think VOC, or if you studied market research, VOC as voice of the customers kind of become a very generic term for market research or getting customer feedback. If you look at the history of it, it's actually a very specific set of techniques where you're identifying a range of customers in each segment. You're going out with 2 people. You're doing a lot of interviewing. You're bringing those back. You're breaking it into voices. That's where voices comes from. You cluster it, and then you interpret the results. It's very time consuming, but it's also very powerful. It was often sold as the answer to nailing requirements. One of the big questions we get from executives, how can we ensure that development teams have accurate requirements before development starts? And that's one way to do it, but we often then respond, well, it's not really the right question. The question is, how can we start with uncertainty and allow the teams to work through it quickly to get to the optimal requirements? And that's a better way to approach it. And voice of the customer is going to give us ongoing feedback to do that. So we don't want to do the pure VOC techniques, but we want to leverage some of the techniques that are under the VOC umbrella. So how do we do good customer interviews? How do we do it effectively? And how do we process the data? And how do we do it over time versus one big project, one big event at the beginning of the project? So we're looking for really good enough data and almost just-in-time VOC is a way to think about it. And we're not looking for a huge number of customers, but enough in the right type that are going to give us good feedback. So just to dive into an example, both techniques and a specific case, get our heads wrapped around a bit with it. So this is a company we worked with, industrial products, very exciting, but they had very real difficult challenges. They're developing next generation meter that goes out and measures industrial process. And they had a major fundamental question is, if we remove this interface, we could save a lot of money. We could do a lot of things either with a remote application on a mobile phone or on a desktop somewhere. Is it really important to have this local interface? And if it is, what should it do? And if we add it, can we really justify, should maybe have a couple different SKUs? One has a local interface, it's $200 more. One doesn't, it's all remote or through an app. How do we do this? So you can imagine there's just tons of questions. And so they have to kind of systematically look at the big picture, yes or no, should we do this interface? And then ongoing, is it, did we get it right? Did we get it right? Is it enough value? Did they like the dog food? And so they're going to need that ongoing. So very simple. In the first case, they wanted to get some early feedback, and they leverage a customer sales event. And so this is often companies and teams have sales events where your top customers are actually already gathered. And how do we leverage that? So they made their product management team as part of the agenda. They had some techniques. They made sure that anybody in the room signed NDAs if they're going to share anything new. They clarified it that, hey, we're just looking for feedback. We're trying to understand your situation, et cetera. So how you frame it is important. We're not looking for, this feature or that feature. We want to understand your needs. And then they use an interactive activity. So these are part of the tactics that are going to be critical to learn as a team and have somebody really own it in terms of thinking about how do you kind of aggregate and pull it together. So one is finding the customers. Two is making sure you can access and they're going to be paying attention. They want to be part of your solution, the motivation. And then what's the specific activities? And then how do you process it? That's why it's so hard to do. There's a lot of these pieces have to come together. So they leveraged just some simple handouts, and they used a range of discussion techniques. So in this case, they had a couple handouts that showed option one, option two, where, hey, we're thinking about this based on how we've observed you control devices. We're trying to identify what's the best approach we want to get your feedback. And so they used some basic feedback tools, leveraging something they put in front of them, almost like a rapid prototype of what this might be and what that might be. And it shows here they're identical, but they were different solutions. One's local, one's remote. And then they asked them some questions, and that allowed them to kind of aggregate a range of people in the room. And they had it on a piece of paper. They could go back and kind of process it. What were the top pros? What were the top cons? And that gives you one level of insight. But what's most important, we'll dive into here, is how do you go beyond this piece of paper? And this is where you're going to separate a market research, I'd say more professional, somebody that's kind of experienced in it, and somebody that is less experienced. Is you might put this less experienced, we'll put this in front of them, they'll get the data, they'll take it back and say, that's the answer. Okay. And that's okay. That's better than nothing, but we're going to take it one step further. So this gives you an example of, they had a couple other handouts that was with that piece of paper, give them some idea. What do we mean by the local interface? What might be on it? And give them some ideas. And they had multiple screens they showed them. So here's the challenge, is that the answers that you receive on a piece of paper like this, they're really not as important as understanding the why behind the answers. So if you had somebody in the group said, these are the three pros, these are the three cons, and they don't really give you any context. And so what you really understand is, why did you respond that way? What was the situation? Tell me more about that. So the skill set of doing this kind of work is not getting the answer to the first question. It's the follow-up questions and how do you do the probing questions. So if you've ever studied, market research, interviewing, or voice of the customer, all the good stuff, all the real answers comes down to the probing. So if you are, if this is you and you're doing any of the market research, the question is, how do you get good at the probing? And it really comes down to a couple of things. One, you're always asking open-ended questions. Yes or no doesn't allow you to do much probing. I mean, you can go, hey, why did you say yes? And you keep probing. You can always get there. So don't get too hung up on writing the perfect questions, but you do want to go out with a structured line of inquiry, because if you're in this case, we did it in one group, and they went out and had a group discussion and listened to different people, had other people respond, and did it in a group discussion. But you can do the same techniques one-on-one, and you want to make sure that you structure your inquiry, because if you have, let's say, 20 discussions over time, And if this is your job, you might have 5 discussions in 1 week. It might be another month before you have a couple more. If you don't have any structure to it, it's hard to get the data to fill in the consistency, which is why we wanted the structure of the customer persona, that customer value pyramid, because we want to know what we're looking for in every conversation so that we can have consistency. I have 8 different conversations over 2 months. I want to have generally an understanding. I'm asking similar questions so I can process it in a similar way to get to answers. Okay. And a lot of times we have the questions first, like what material do we want to use? Do we want to do this or that? You're trying to get the answer without giving them the answer first. So you're trying to understand their needs and preferences. So having a clarity on your structure of the question is critical. Open-ended questions. You really need to forget about your product, and I'll share with you why in a second. And customers are going to want to come back and they're going to ask you questions, and you just reverse it. That seemed important to you. Why did you find that important? And it's literally just different techniques. So the other tip is once you have somebody to own it, you've got the strategic questions you're trying to answer, you know when and why you're doing it. You need to think about, okay, what are their techniques? And a lot of the times techniques comes down to interviewing skills. Okay, what's the structure of an interview that makes sense for the situation? And once you build that kind of library, that pool of techniques and scripts, you can leverage it again and again, different projects. So that's why it's almost part of your body of knowledge, your center of excellence. Okay? And it comes down to this probing. So once a customer answers a question, the next step is the probing. Why is that important? Tell me more. In what situations? Why did you respond that way? So once you get 2 or 3 probing questions down, you're going to be almost an expert in customer interviews. So that's the next tip is just be really good at the probing questions, and you're going to naturally be a good interviewer. So you probably heard in PMI world, so the famous 5 whys. It's very related. Customers get annoyed a little bit if you go back why 5 times every time, but you have to do it kind of systematically. And you'll know that when you get to a good answer that makes sense, you understand their need, you really understood their priorities and why. And you don't have to keep going why. But it's just a common understanding, the 5 whys or common framework to think about. You want to get to the core reason that they're saying something or they're requesting or needing something. So the challenge is if you're doing customer interviews, and it's probably the #1 technique for leveraging a customer panel. And the nice thing about it is these could be phone interviews, especially today, they could be Zoom interviews. Probably not email, but you can use email for targeted topics. But thinking about really primarily as kind of Zoom or video conference calls. And the question is, what are you going to do with this? This is having the end in mind, is making sure that you have a structure for the results. And that's where it comes down to having that persona, having that customer needs pyramid. And every time you come back from a discussion, you're going to put it in a format that you can actually leverage with the team that said, these were the priorities that the customers had around these areas. That's what we're seeking. These are what was important to them. And so it depends on the questions you're asking, where you are in the project. Sometimes they're going to be very specific. Sometimes they might be more general because you're trying to understand those major decision factors early, or you might be understanding very specific, good enough questions later in the process, which is why this is an ongoing process. And doesn't mean you're getting customer feedback at the end of every iteration. And that's one of the misnomers in Agile is that you're going to get customer feedback every sprint, or in our world, every IPAC iteration. You just don't have time, energy to do that. Customers don't want to give you that kind of time anyway. So you have to be a little strategic about where you're getting the feedback, how you're approaching it, and what you're looking for. And from the very beginning, you're going to kind of create a little bit of a feedback schedule or plan that's going to be adaptable as you evolve and learn what you need. So interview is going to be your #1 technique, but the key is having a structure both to how you ask it, as well as when you get these responses, how you're going to process it and how you're going to use it. Okay. So one of my favorite industry examples, just to share with you, is that when you do a customer discussion interview, is you never accept a feature or a solution or a specification as the answer. It's just one of those primary foundational things to think about is don't do it. Because as soon as you accept a feature, you lose the power of the feedback. We want to know why they want that feature. What's the priority versus other things that might be better for their needs. So my favorite example is industry suitcases. So if you ever bought a suitcase, and this is showing my years a little bit, is that, you know, before we had wheels on suitcases, you actually had to lift your suitcase, and you might have had 3 suitcases. And I never had one of these, but this was right before my generation, where people would lift their suitcases, and then they discovered, hopefully with doing some customer research, they said, what feature do you want in your next suitcase? And people said, oh, I want wheels. And if they stopped there and they said, okay, let's put wheels on the suitcase, this is what the industry gave them. And this was kind of the industry standard suitcase for a decade or so or more, is that I had a standard suitcase that I could pick up, but I put little wheels on the bottom. So is anybody on our discussion today, did anybody ever own one of these suitcases? I'm in chat right now.
My parents did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I was a toddler, my parents gave suitcases to everybody, and this was the style. And if you ever used one, you carried around. It's like carrying a dog through the airport. It's on a leash. Every time you made a turn, the suitcase would fall over. You still had to pick it up going on to escalators and elevator. It really solved almost none of the problems that people had. And all it would have taken was a little bit more in depth of observation, asking the right questions, getting feedback through the development cycle, and this entire industry would have skipped this stage. So it's just a classic example of don't stop at listening for the feature. You're listening for the needs and understanding that behind the feature. So I'm just going to share with you a couple group techniques as give you some food for thought and some homework. There's a ton of techniques, okay? And Matt, you mentioned Luke Hoffman and his innovation games. Those are all great techniques. So that's a really good example of leveraging some simple techniques to get good feedback. The key is what's the purpose, how you're going to leverage them through the process. So a couple of his favorite ones are by a feature, motor vote. One simple technique that I'm a fan of, I'm going to share with you these top 2 techniques. They're very simple, but they can give you a lot of insight. So I got a group of customers in front of me. I might have a part of a sales meeting, or hopefully you created that customer channel, or maybe I aggregate 5 or 6 of them at a trade show. So the key is, well, how do you find access and get access? But once you do that, what are your techniques? And these are just a couple ideas. If you're not familiar with dot voting, I'll jump into that first. This is a really simple, powerful technique. Is where you put a bunch of options in front of the customer, and you give them some dots to vote. Now I'll jump to a problem here. In this case, we had a software company, and they were developing this product called Unify, and they were struggling with, is it good enough to launch? And the development team had their opinion, management had their opinion, product management had their opinion, and they just couldn't align on the problems and were they big enough to prevent a launch. And so they did not have a customer panel. They would get kind of ad hoc feedbacks from some of the early beta users, but it wasn't structured. And so you need some techniques to structure that. And so dot voting is a good one. So depending on how you do it, you can do this online, you can do it in a group. In this case, they gathered about 20 different beta users that were in 2 different cities. So not a lot of expense. These are people that wanted to be involved. They paid them a little bit of money to come in, have a discussion. But ideally, this is something over time. But in this case, it was just an emergency. They had to get a response. So in this case, they used dot voting, and they put little posters on the wall. And they said, okay, we've identified these are the top 10, 12 things that we found somewhat problematic with this problem. We want to get your feedback on them. And really, we want to know what's your priority. And are these big problems or small problems? And we're going to ask you to vote on that. And dot voting says you've got these 12 different problems. You're going to give them three huge dots, red dots that say, yes, this is a showstopper. You got 4 dots that says this is not really a problem. Please, just launch. You guys can figure that out later. And you're forcing them into a decision. Every participant is forced into a decision on what's most important to them. And so they'll go around the room. They understand the problem. They vote on it. You get results. You discuss the results, and boom, you've got a prioritization of, we got to solve these 4 things before launch. These things we can prioritize later, and these things we're going to worry about as we get to them. So it's just a technique to get everybody aligned. You're getting feedback. You're getting real-time input. It literally takes half an hour to do, a little bit of preparation, and it removes all that hallway conversation, the opinions of executives versus R&D versus product management with one very simple technique. So you're combining both access to customers, a little bit of technique on how you discuss the problems, how you present them with the exhibits, and then the simple technique of dot voting, and how you're going to process the results. So all that has to come together, but once you understand the techniques, it can all happen pretty quickly. So that's dot voting. Another very simple tactic I like is called decision pie. Where in front of a customer, you put a big circle and you ask them to say, hey, this is a pie chart of how you make decisions. And the question here is, when you're researching X to solve a problem, what are the major factors that drive your decision? So, and you're asking them to create a little pie chart. And they kind of put a big pie chart on the most thing, and they might say like, oh, price, number one, and quality, number two, or performance, number three. And that's okay, because it gives you that starting point for probing. Then you dive into, well, tell me more about performance. And you said performance was number two. You gave it 33% on your pie chart. Why did you do that? What was important to you about performance? So it gives them something to do, interactive. It forces them to think about how they make decisions. And it gives you kind of a visual that you can start aggregating a range of customers and bring it together into one solution. So you might have 4 different customers, had 4 different priorities, and that's okay. We want to understand why, and often you have to aggregate that and make it meaningful for making good R&D decisions. So that's 2 techniques. There's a wide range of other techniques. This is kind of step-by-step how to do it. And there's no right or wrong. It's just getting comfortable with it. And paper prototype is another good one, especially for software. I love putting screenshots of kind of some of the major functionality and say, hey, circle what you like, circle what you don't care about. Tell me what you think the problem's going to be here. Give them something to do and something to talk about, and typically you get good feedback. Some of the innovation games, the buy a feature, motorboat, those are really good to drive discussions. Think about priorities. Very simple one, make it a 10, is tell me about the ideal solution and what would be the path between what we do today and that solution. And there's just a whole range of techniques that you can use. The key is finding a couple of good ones that work for you, get good at them, leverage them again and again and again. And they have to be obviously appropriate for the types of decisions you're making and the right timing for your project situation. So, all right, so I don't know if that was useful at all, but I thought I'd share with you just a little of my experience, some of the techniques that we use and which cases. The bottom line here, it takes time to build these skills. Somebody's got to own it. You don't necessarily got to be an expert, but you do have to have a little bit of knowledge of the techniques. How do you access and leverage those customers? And ideally, over time, you're building this capability. You're building the samples, the techniques, and you're leveraging it so all teams can do it. It's not this big burden. It's just something that's part of your way of working. So I think I shared this last time. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? In chat, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Carnegie. I forget. If you're from Pittsburgh, it's Carnegie, and if you're from everywhere else, it's Carnegie. I always forget which one. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Anybody? Oh, practice. Thank you. Practice, practice, practice. So you got to try it. Don't be afraid of it. Set up the panel first. Learn some techniques. Try it. But first have those questions ready of what you want to accomplish and how you're going to process it. So that's all I had for you all today. Love to have any questions, thoughts.
It's great. Thank you very much, Dorian. Yeah, I don't see any questions in chat, but any questions for Dorian or even Michelle?
So George, in Pittsburgh, do they pronounce it Carnegie or Carnegie? And he's going to type Carnegie.
Sorry, looking for the mute. Hadn't really thought of it. Well, I can say in Pittsburgh, we have our pronunciation for everything. We've got a neighborhood, North Versailles, Versailles, instead of Versailles. We just make stuff up in Pittsburgh.
I like it.
I did go to Carnegie Mellon, so
there you go.
However I said it, that's how we say it. I don't even think about it.
Now, if I recall, Coke, carbonated soft drinks in Pittsburgh are soda or they pop. I always forget.
And I know that people always ask me that.
I
I just called everything a Coke.
call
Um,
everything Coke too. That's the funny, yeah. Yeah, I grew up 60 miles south of Pittsburgh. We just called everything a Coke, but people give us a hard time for that.
is that Washington?
Um, uh, West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody have experience with voice of the customer? Now, this is a challenge, and I really appreciate everybody joining today. It's one of those. It can be a very dry topic, as you can imagine. We could talk a lot about statistics, and are these answers good enough to drive really good decision? And the question I always ask is, well, do you have any data driving your decisions? And the answer is often no. So yeah, you could have a pendulum swing to having a huge expense and getting statistical validity for every decision, but what a waste of time. You want to get directional decisions that are good enough, that gives you confidence to move forward, removes the hallway conversation, gives you some power as an R&D team to make good decisions. My favorite is, I used to be in product management for years, and when I had customer data behind my discussions with the team, people wouldn't question it. They'd question it, but it was much easier conversation to get it aligned on a path and a direction than if it was just my opinion. If I shared, hey, yeah, I'm representing the market and we need to do this. You need to add that feature. And I get the question from R&D, okay, if I add that feature, how many more will you sell? What percentage of increase in price can you create if I add that feature? And you get these questions that you cannot answer. But if you have a customer panel where you're getting consistent feedback and you're letting that guide a lot of those questions, all that kind of friction goes away because now you're jointly hearing from customers what's happening and they're guiding it. It's not perfect, but it's a better approach than opinion based, than the friction, or certainly making stupid mistakes. And you see that all the time with products where if they just did a little bit of customer research, they would have avoided a lot of mistakes. And that's really what we're looking for in these feedback loops.
Yeah. I put a comment in there back in Austin when I was at a company. We had a customer advisory council. It was actually for the safe and compliant usage of social media by investment banks and folks that there was regulation in how they would use things like social media. So it was social media, which sounds fun, and sure it is, but really it was mostly about compliance folks within these investment banks. And we had a customer advisory council, and it was like some of the largest names that are you would know, and some of the smallest ones that you probably wouldn't know unless you were from a small town. And there's about a dozen folks that we got together. Um, actually at LinkedIn's world headquarters in the Empire State Building. Anyway, and we did buy a feature. I called it something else because everybody was there, including me, in a suit, which is a different kind of not quite
Right.
Austin kind of thing. But I
Right.
can't remember what I called it, but it was sort of the same kind of thing. And what as a small company, we were trying to prove out our product roadmap, and we had these ideas. We didn't show them the roadmap, but we said, here are the things that we're thinking about. And we had a good relationship, so we knew a lot of their pain points, which was specifically the contention between marketing and their desire to use social media and compliance, saying the CEO could go to jail kind of thing if we do the wrong thing. And that friction between the two, and we used by feature to get alignment. It was nearly universal from the largest of the large to the small, and it
Right.
validated the roadmap and provided some really interesting insights that we hadn't considered previously, which were kind of more like you could sort of skew it a different way and get more by thinking about the problem and articulating the problem a little bit differently. And but it really was like the problems to be solved. Those were the things that we were focused on, not the solutions, but like the problems to be solved. And it was a very useful we used that, and like there was all sorts of big sheets and stickies and stuff like that. So I brought it back to Austin and I put it in front of the engineering team, and I was like, here's what came back from the CAC, and that's what we built our roadmap, and that's what we delivered, and it delighted
Did you
customers.
feel that the R&D team was more open to the once they knew you had some data behind it? Was everybody a little more aligned and easier to move forward when making decisions?
They were. It had gone from what I might say an imaginary roadmap. There were some management
Mhm.
changes, and I was part of the new management team. And it went from a sort of this list of hopes and dreams to something that actually, had concreteness. And there was
Exactly.
one of our
Yeah.
chief outspoken, I won't say her name just because she is somewhat of a public figure, but we knew her and we called her by name. And it's like, well, this is what this woman's name was saying. Like she's like the head person that's like sort of like defining the industry's use of social media in a compliant industry. And it's like we got to go like listen to her too. So the product management team, which was part of my team too, sort of I don't want to say slipped to the background, but it was like it was this aligning moment for everybody, not just engineering and whether they believe product management, but it's like kind of this exciting product management, marketing, engineering all together, and going off and delivering these roadmap items. And it was like that was pretty good, and it led to deals, large deals afterwards, which eventually led to the acquisition of the company. So it was kind of a key moment in getting that. And we hadn't had that before. We didn't have that alignment from customers. You had a lot of people talking about customers and what they wanted, but you didn't have this clear moment that aligned everybody together.
Exactly.
And it
That's
was
a
popular. But
beautiful
by
example.
those CAC folks, like they were at first they were just kind of a little bit, this is weird, but I'm a weird guy. So like
Mhm. Yeah.
I said, let's try it. Why not? Over lunch or something. And then they got into it. They started
Yeah.
do like negotiating with each other, like, like goodbye feature can be. It's like if you do this and I'll do that. And then that had a bit of fun with it, but we got some great results.
Yeah, I think the fear of doing it and the fear that customers won't don't want to do it, especially the higher you go, you assume, oh, they're
Yeah.
not going to give me good feedback, or they won't want to do the silly exercise, even the draw a pie that I shared or do dot
Right.
voting. I That works all the way up to CEOs.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
put that from a CEO, they're happy to do it because they like to see new techniques as well, and they want to get their feedback as accurate as you can. So it works all the way up and down. It does provide that kind of congealing between R&D and management and product management. There's so many benefits to doing it. Yeah, there's downside where you might not like what you hear. Um, there's some danger, especially with advisory councils, where
Right.
you probably brought in your top 10 big customers. It's great that you brought in smaller customers too. That was a really good design. So somebody thought through that a little bit, right? And the
Yeah.
techniques, and it might have been you.
Yeah.
Um,
It was a mentor of mine. He was our chief marketing officer and great Austin icon, Bruce Milne, who's no longer with us, but he worked at Vignette and a lot of other places. And it was I provided the hey, let's do build a feature, and he was like, all right, how do we architect this correctly so we get these people?
right.
It's really quite good. So joint jam,
Exactly. Don't
collaboration.
take, yeah, you can't take any technique and just, you got to think about its application. Even the ones I shared with you. That's what one thing I really like about dot voting, and you probably use dot voting
Oh,
because you
sure.
had, all right, is it's a very flexible tool and you can just modify it in so many different ways for your situation. But what it does is qualitative prioritization at the end of the day, and that's what you need. And it's fast. You can get really great results, especially if they're consistent. And yeah, you're going to have cases where I have a group of people and I cannot get consensus at all, and that's okay. But at least you know that, and it can drive the next level of feedback, or you just have to make some strategic decisions.
Yep.
Customer feedback does not replace strategy, as I mentioned, does not replace your vision, but it provides you some data for guiding it.
Yep. And I do
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
Bezos kind of way. Like I worked in Amazon too, so like the idea that you have a certain amount of data and you have a certain amount of anecdotes and you want both, and but you can't wait on perfection on either, and you don't want to do
exactly.
everything based on anecdotes, you don't want to do everything based on data. You want to have both, and it's sort of like the wisdom and the judgment of the people in the room that have the context are kind of from the Ray Dalio principles kind of thing. It's like when you combine that kind of stuff, and I really like what you talked about, thinking about how we make decisions, it's one of the things that I've been talking about and thinking about. It's like if you boil everything down, it's like you got the right people, you got all this kind of stuff. It's like, how do we make decisions? And that is a very powerful question to ask and think about before you start.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
like what could be more important, right? Like,
exactly. Well, that's why I see tools often misused.
right,
Personas, they get written, but are they really driving any decisions? Are they accurate? So personas are often very misused. And then if you a lot of times customers will they'll do some form of customer feedback, but they don't know how to leverage. They don't know how to structure it. They don't know what questions they're really trying to get answered from it. So it all starts. It has to be very holistic.
yeah,
Otherwise, it's kind of wasted effort.
I
So,
think just to add to something I was thinking about as you were saying the five whys,
yeah,
I do feel that when you were talking about why do people not do enough, or why is, in most scenarios, people don't do a lot of, customer feedback loops because it's painful and whatever. But I think it's also because there's not enough time spent on asking why. Instead, they ask, what feature do you want? But
right.
not why do you want it. So I think the question, the very first thing on the VOC should always be why. What's the value? What's your problem? Why do you need anything? And then kind of dive deeper into potential whats. Um, anyway,
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
a thought that
Yeah.
flashed.
Well, when you do this work, you start getting comfortable that you always anytime you structure an interview guide, it's always kind of top down where you're starting with getting clarity of the problem. And if you want to present features, it's absolutely okay to present, hey, we're thinking about these three features, or we want to get your feedback on this feature. That's okay, but you need to use the early part of the interview to understand that why, the context, and then you know why they're saying it. And even then, if they go, I don't like that feature, you got to keep going. You got to probe deeper. Why? um, but inevitably, if I ask the customer, just like um, Henry Ford, what would you like in the next generation product? They're going to name three things I hated about it, say fix it. They're going to say make it 50% cheaper, and they're going to maybe give you a feature idea that they've been thinking about for 5 years. You're not really understanding context. You're not understanding their problems, their situation. You're not understanding any of the why. So that's really the key, is getting good at that. And a lot of people, you don't want this to be your career. You just want to be good enough. Most people don't anyway. You want to be good enough that when you need it, somebody on your team has the skills to help you do it, or they do it. So, but somehow you got to build it. We call it one of the three enabling capabilities of Agile, as we talked about last time. And a lot of teams struggle with it. It just takes a little energy to figure it out. Well,
well,
thank
one
you.
quarter
Yep.
after. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you, Dorian, so much. Really appreciate the extra time. And if folks have questions for Dorian, we do have an Agile Austin Slack community, which I know some of the folks are in. You can reach out to Vishal or I. I'm just matt.roberts@agileaustin.org, and Vishal is vishal.chef. And thanks again, Dorian. Really appreciate your contribution to the community for our first two-part series. So really great.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'll do other two-parters. Do you think in general two parts makes sense? I don't think we had a good overlap, did we, folks? I'm just throwing it out there. It's almost two parts is good, but they almost have to be a little bit independent given the nature of
Yeah.
these kind of events.
I thought it flowed well. I thought it was great. And we like experimenting. So like
Yeah,
we're product
yeah,
and AI, so we should always be trying new
I-
things out. So but
yeah.
yeah, if Jeff or Peter or George, other folks give us some feedback.
Fantastic. Let's get it on the schedule so we can make sure we're all there.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you, folks.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
See you next
Have a
time.
wonderful
Yep.
weekend.
See you all next time. Bye-bye.
See you in April.